Throughout the Second World War, there were a number of executions that took place, with the condemned being found guilty of desertion. Leaving your post was considered by Hitler and the Nazis as one of the most serious offences that someone could commit, and like during the First World War, they believed that a soldier should pay for it with their lives. During World War I, there were scores of British soldiers who were shot at dawn and were executed for military offences of desertion or cowardice, and still today these executions are seen as stains on the British Army, with many of the victims in fact being very young, and also suffering with conditions such as shell shock. But during World War II there was one Nazi war criminal who deserted from the German army, but he then lied to authorities and he became responsible for organising mass executions of German army deserters, despite the fact he was one himself. He was playing the executioner when he should have been the one on the receiving end of the firing squad's bullets. Join us today as we look at the execution of Willi Herold, the executioner of Emsland. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Born on the 11th of September 1925 in a small village in Saxony, Willi Herold joined the Young Volk when he was 10. This was a separate part of the Hitler Youth for boys, who were aged between 10 and 13. In this group they would participate in many different activities and sports, but the Nazis would indoctrinate the young members, and by the end of the Second World War, some members of the Young Volk were even fighting, and had become child soldiers. However, Willi Herold was then expelled from the group as he skipped service and then tried to make his own gangs and groups, which was against what the leaders allowed. He later at 14 joined the Hitler Youth, and whilst there he loved being part of the group, and through this group he rose to a number of different positions. But he continued his education, and at the age of 15 he became a chimney sweep, before he went AWOL with a friend, and looked towards moving to America. But he was then arrested by the Gestapo, and he then finished his apprenticeship before he was called into the Reich Labour Service, working on the Atlantic Wall. But then on the 30th of September 1943, Herold joined the German army. At this time the Germans had lost the Battle of Stalingrad, and they had sustained heavy losses, so they were looking to replenish their army with fresh men and troops. Herold trained as a paratrooper, and he was noted for having excellent physical fitness. But his division was the last to undergo full paratrooper training, and he then took part in battles in Italy, including at Monte Cassino in 1944. He gained promotion to Lance Corporal, and was given many different accolades including the Iron Cross First Class, for destroying British tanks on a beachhead. However, in March 1945, his unit were on the retreat from the Netherlands to Germany, as the Allies were pushing the Germans back at great speed. Herold, during the retreat, got separated from his unit late in the month, and he was travelling on his own between Gronau and Bad Bentheim. Whilst he was travelling, he came across a damaged Wehrmacht car riddled with bullet holes, and inside was a uniform of a decorated Luftwaffe Captain, and Herold then took this and assumed the identity of Captain Herold of the 6th Parachute Division. He regrouped with other Germans and convinced a major of this, and he was then given a group of 4 soldiers, which was then expanded to around 60. Herold said he was on a special mission given to him by Hitler himself, and he conducted a number of scouting missions with his men. He then also made a number of attempts to fight with the Allies, and he and his men would join a unit close to the village of Leifen, which had been occupied by the Allies. The effort to retake the village failed, and Herold's men were demolished under tank fire, but then Herold, the rogue commander and captain, was now trying to recruit more men and equipment into this strange band of soldiers. He came across a garrison commander who told him that there were hundreds of former German soldiers in a prison camp, waiting for the war to come to an end, and Herold, seizing the opportunity to recruit more men, went to the prison camp. They arrived, and whilst there one of the supervisors asked Willi Herold to judge a group of 30 prisoners who had escaped during a march to different sites, when they were then recaptured. These were of course German soldiers, and Willi Herold was asked to judge these men, with more people fooled by his false identity. Herold stated that 5 of the men should be executed, but he was then stopped by an official, who then asked Herold to get permission from the head of the prison camps to do this. He did not get permission for the executions, and Herold then got the Gestapo involved, but the Gestapo granted Herold personally the responsibility to execute 30 escaped prisoners. But then he went further. Over the next 2 weeks he ordered the executions of dozens more prisoners from a list of inmates which had been compiled. He also chose many inmates to join his group of soldiers, and he gave them uniforms and weapons, but ultimately the group were not very successful. Willi Herold also enlisted 12 soldiers to become his bodyguards. They would travel north and would terrify villagers in local areas. They raided one prison and dragged out 5 Dutchmen. They then forced them to dig their own graves and then shot them dead before they hanged a farmer who was waving a white flag of surrender. But in a hotel on the 30th of April 1945, Willi Herold was arrested and was imprisoned. He was placed on trial, but he was then released due to the involvement of a Kriegsmarine Chief Justice. Herold was released and he then left the town of Urich, and he tried to hide out, returning to work as a chimney sweep. But on the 23rd of May 1945, he was arrested by Royal Navy officers as he stole a loaf of bread. But his crimes were then investigated, and then he, along with other inmates, were forced to dig up the remains of prisoners who had died at the prisoner of war camps that he tried to recruit people from, and also where he'd carried out the executions. 195 bodies were excavated, and then Herold was placed on trial. During this he was known for being rather laid back, expressing no remorse for his crimes. But then he was sentenced to death, and he had been held responsible for the executions and murder of at least 111 people. The important thing to remember with the case of Willi Herold is the fact he was a liar, and was someone who wanted to create his own group of soldiers that he could lead. He was not who he said he was, and he should have been imprisoned by the German military himself, as he was a deserter after all. But because of his crimes, he was not sentenced to death to die by a standard military death of a firing squad, but instead was sentenced to death to die on the guillotine. This was of course the efficient but brutal device, which became known during the French Revolution for taking the heads off thousands of people, but it was also a device used in Nazi Germany for executing resistors. Inside a Wolfenbüttel prison, he was brought to the execution chamber. There stood a German guillotine known as a Fallbeil, and other defendants were taken into the execution chamber kicking and screaming, crying their eyes out as they were dragged to the guillotine. But Willi Herold did not show this emotion. He went to his execution with calm, and he was then strapped onto the metal board, which was then slid under the guillotine blade. The executioner then made the final checks as a number of witnesses looked on, before the blade was released, taking Herold's head clean off. At the age of just 21, Willi Herold was executed by the guillotine. In the dying days of the Second World War, he seized the opportunity to become someone else, and to fool a number of people claiming he was in fact a prestigious Luftwaffe captain and pilot, who had been sent on a secret mission from Hitler. He was a fraud, but he was a man who it's believed was personally responsible for the executions of 200 German men who had deserted and fled from the army, as they believed the war had turned against them. In Hitler's eyes, these were men who were deemed to have been the worst of the worst, and in his eyes they were rightfully executed, but Willi Herold was actually one of these men. He himself was a deserter, and he was a man who had fled the Wehrmacht and his unit, but when he found the Luftwaffe uniform, he wanted to make a new persona for himself, and to escape military court-martial, also for desertion. But he met his end on the guillotine, but he was a con-man, who at the age of 21 was responsible for dozens of executions, and he deserved the nickname, the Executioner of Emsland. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.